Okay, we're up and running, so welcome everybody to the our last meeting before Christmas. The Co-ordinating overview through the committee. My first task is to say that the meeting is being webcast live or subsequent broadcast by the Council YouTube service, and you can record and take photographs unless there are confidential or exempt items. Are there any apologies?
Change the apologies from Councillor Brown, Councillor Clements, and
I think Lorinda Kuhn is going to be late. Declarations of interest, are there any? Just to remind you, there are, you can't discuss it. They aren't. The action notes of the 15th of October, are people happy to confirm those? Thank you. Just to say that Robert Coleman is stuck in traffic. Item 5, the update on the elections bill will take you when you arrive. So that gives us the opportunity to welcome Peter and Wendy from Customer Services team to update us on customer service strategy with a vote. I know we'll probably come on to the councillors' inquiries, but we're going to start off with our main focus, which is going to be members of the public and how they're comparing to parent. We have been told that the number of complaints has gone through the roof in recent months, so maybe you could tell us why you think that is, and just tell us briefly how state of play, and then we'll ask questions as and when.
Yeah, sure. So, good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well. We take to Cabinet next week the customer service strategy, which has been informed by all the work on complaints. It's been informed by a lot of work that's been done in the last few weeks and months to really understand the state of customer experience of the services that the council provides. And I think I'm not going to be glossed over. The council has to improve its quality of service delivery at every respect so that we become that relentlessly reliable public service that everybody expects and pays for. And we are not there today. And the number of complaints, and Wendy will bring that to life in a minute, is just illustrative of the point that we need to change. So the customer service strategy, the cabinet paper, the business case that goes with it is all about making that change. So you've got the papers, we avoided going through a presentation, but we'll try and bring it to life for you today to help you understand why we're doing it, what we're going to do, where we are today, and how we're really going to tackle this. And it's not going to be easy. When we did a lot of analysis, and perhaps you might have said, well, you don't need to do any of this analysis, but we did a lot of work over the spring and summer period to understand what the customer's experience really was across a range of their services. And it illustrated that we're not in a good place. You will know that in the casework, you know, and we have devised then a strategy and a delivery plan to absolutely tackle it. We know that our customers, the citizens of Birmingham, deserve better. The strategy is multifaceted. It covers how we access, how customers access, how we use data. It articulates promises that we are standing up to be judged against through the delivery and execution of the delivery plan that supports the strategy. We know our customers judge us by their everyday experience of everything else that they get, particularly those who are digitally savvy. They look at Monzo, they look at Uber, they look at Amazon, and they can see what an high customer experience that is. And that is our competition, whether we like it or not. We know as a council that we are not as good as we need to be. We get contact where we shouldn't have contact because our basic service delivery doesn't work, or when it doesn't work, we encourage them to access us in different ways, and that just then creates all sorts of noise and tension, and that's not helpful. We need to get the basics right. Complaints are really important part of the process, but they're a symptom of service performance, not the end result, and we need to learn from that, and I'll hand over to Wendy to talk through that. We know that the last 18 months has been really challenging for the council. It has highlighted a mirror of our performance. It's also acted as a spur for innovation, but we know that's not good enough. We know we need to do more, and the strategy articulates what that more looks like and sets out a set of promises, as I said, that we will hold ourselves to account to over the next 2 to 3 years. So why do we need to do this? Because it's just not good enough where we are today. We need to improve, as I said before, the kind of things that we need to do. And I'm happy to take questions, but what I'd like Wendy to do is, one, talk about a bit more detail of what we discovered through the work that we did, how we're going to tackle it, most importantly, and then we can bring in the learning that the complaints work, as painful and challenging as that remains, is why that has informed us. And your own work has also been a really important challenge to improve what we do.
Yeah, so just in the context, this will not be a surprise to people because we've had many conversations here about the complaints work that Open Scrutiny supported then really help shape the form, the direction of travel in those key areas that we need to focus on. But whilst we've been in discovery since March, we've been looking at all elements of customer contact, what customer experiences, what the satisfaction levels are, across all 1,200 services that we operate as a council. And only 5% of those services actually seek feedback from customers about their satisfaction level. So first and foremost, that is a fundamental issue that we need to resolve. That over 1,200 services, only 5% are asking for customers' feedback about how you handle the experience with us, what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve. So that's the starting point. So only 2% of those services, the customer contact is managed through the contact centre in terms of having the standardised customer experience in terms of what to expect, in terms of when the call will be answered, how the call will be answered, and how that will be responded to. So less than 2% of services of those 12 are processed through a supported by the contact centre. Now, this is not a contact centre programme. What it is a customer service programme. So this does not mean that when we undertake a review to look at how the customers are interacting with those 12 services, we will bring everything into the contact centre. Bluntly, not everything will be suitable for the contact centre. But what it is about is embedding a customer service culture across the organisation, that for those services that are high volume and complex, that cannot be processed through a contact centre, that we have a series of customer standards that those services are expected to work to with consistent systems, consistent processes. So if it's a customer you ring up and speak to a service, you have exactly the same customer experience as you would do if you wanted to speak to somebody in social care or highways or any of these services. And at the moment, that is a bit potluck depending on which number you ring. And on that point, we've got excessive points of contact. So we advertise over 200 telephone numbers for those 1,200 services. There will probably be more. And we've also got 151 email addresses. We've got 130 postal addresses, and we've got 265 web pages, most of which are out of date, been there for a long time. When we look at the web forms that we ask the customer to log on, look for the form, they have to know where they want, what service they need to get in touch with. When they find the form, they then have to print it out. They then ask for a wet signature to then send it back. And quite often, postal addresses, in some of the examples that we found from Discovery, we haven't operated in those buildings for a number of years. So we then have to go around to manually collect post, bring it back, scan the document and send it to the area, all causing delays to get access to revenue services. So we need to standardise the way we do this. And it's not about having one size or one number that will be able to achieve all of that. It is about reducing that down and making it easy for customers to access at the time that they choose. So it is promoting the use of 24/7. We need to automate where we can. We need to digitalise those processes where we can. Make it easy for you to look for something. If you search in Google for planning application, that should take you straight to the link in the area that you need to go. At the moment, it will direct you to at least 60 places. And that is not a sustainable position moving forward. So if customers wish to transact in the evening and they're able to self-serve, we should enable that to happen. At the moment, it's hit and miss as to whether any of the services do that. Some do it well, not consistently. But equally, we have a finite resource, and the budget pressure is no surprise to anybody. So we will always have a requirement to answer phones and deal with calls and contact that comes in that way. And we need to prioritise that resource and make sure that as much as possible our websites, our web forms and our access is easy for customers to get to the right place quickly. So a lot of that information has in effect informed the strategy. We've held a number of citizen engagement sessions, as well as with businesses, visitors, members of the public. And we've also engaged in a survey, which we had over 1,500 responses. It was a really high level of response over the 3-week period. And that really tested the principles that we set out. So learning from all of the complaints about not being able to get through the days, and then when they do, they get bounced around the organisation. Taking all of that learning from the complaints and the inquiries and the current systems and processes, we've in effect set out a number of principles that we ask customers, would you be prepared to sign up to? Does this feel like we've got this right? Is there anything that's missing? And we've set out a number of principles, which is that every single service needs to be designed with the customer. And this is not rocket science stuff, it's a pretty basic activity, yet we still don't do it in some cases. So driving a customer-centric culture, modernising the tools and technology and making sure that they're as lean as they can be, and making contact easy, measuring that contact and making sure that we're aware of those satisfaction reports and making sure that everybody's applying those consistently. Our promise to citizens is that we will better connect the community and faith groups with development of citizens, fast-track decisions, tell us one's principle. We talk about that, yet what often some people ring about an inquiry in one service area, they ring the next service area, and then the information's not being connected and passed through. And we need to get much better at that. And customer-driven innovation. So it's all very well as officers as designing change, but if we're not engaging with customers about how we implement that change or what they actually want, we could be designing and building the wrong thing, buying the wrong technology. So we have to get customers involved all in our process. Changing and transforming services, quite often that's missing. So part of this strategy is about doing much more of that citizen engagement, citizen panels. If we're going to redesign, let's for instance, the housing repairs function, administration of that, performance, customers may not build what officers will do. So they might say, we want choice about when the appointment will be, not you telling us when it will be, and sending you an automated reminder. And how do we build the technology to suit that requirement in the confines of the restricted budget? But if we do more of that, we will get more of that right first time, as opposed to having to go back and fix it at a later date.
Finally, I'm looking for, but can you also, just to remind you, to focus on the interaction between the Central Customer Services team and the individual breakthroughs? Are they aware of their failing?
Yes.
And if so, how will you
Yeah. So
sort that out?
the whole strategy was built doesn't mean to say that they are not going to find it challenging. We have got to touch 10,000 people at least across the council to improve their most basic customer care. Right. That ownership of the issue. So that has been put to us. We absolutely need to tackle that. It's a shame we're having to do that, but we've got to do that. And all the directors are supportive. There's been wholehearted support for that work, but we still need to make it happen.
So individual directors and the next tier down are under, I mean, no doubt where their failings are and where their priorities should be.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is there's no excuses for not understanding the severity of the problem.
Yeah.
And it's fair to say that the corporate leadership team have been really supportive of this, and this strategy, and that's why it's not a contact centre strategy, customer service in the contact centre, because that has got a baseline. We know what the service levels are, we know how many calls are concerned when, by whom, the quality of that call. The issue is what often when we then try and get an outcome or a particular delivery, and that is where we have to get that embedded in terms in the operation delivery. So this programme is not about building the customer service training programme and everybody goes online and puts through a presentation and says, yeah, I've done customer service training, that's it, I don't need to understand anymore. Part of this model is about building the capacity to go out and embed in those services directly to say, an almost challenge every day, every interaction that we have with the customer, was that as good as it could be? How can we make it better? How can we improve that quality of service? The complaints activity has been really helpful in bringing the directorate teams and complaint teams closer together. The learning that we get out of complaints goes into a directorate management team on a monthly basis, and where we find trends and issues that we can put through that analysis, the directorate then owns service improvement plan that we oversee as part of the team to say, here's the things that we could do better. So if we get in a high volume of justified complaints, because there's a communication issue at the front end of the process, we might have to change the literature or the information that goes out. If it's about service failure delivery, so as an example, in waste services this week, we've gone into city operations and we've drawn out 20 addresses that are consistent themes and white list, so that the directorate team, the operational area, can own that to a proper detailed piece of work across those 20 roads. So that's the level of detail that we're getting into on defence. But we need the same level of detail around customer contact, customer access, citizen inquiries, council inquiries. It's not acceptable that we don't have response times that we've set out as 48 hours up to 10 days to respond. Yet we take 10, 20, 30 days to respond to those basic inquiries. We have to get better at that with a standardised way of interacting with customers or members. That's what we're trying to embed across the organisation. So if you bring a directorate number, you should get exactly the same response as you would with customer service. Whereas we know in some directorates, not all, I have to say, that the phone will ring until somebody answers it, and then depending on who picks the phone up, it could be anybody who picks the phone up, you will get a variable response depending on how that always answers. So this is about setting out principles and saying this is the expectation as an employee, you work for the city council, this is how you should be engaging with customers, citizens, visitors, which will only get bigger as we see more visitors come to the city from our games and initiatives. And so we have to improve before we get to that point so that we can learn to happen. So some of this will be about building technology into those directorates. So when we say ask for information that you would expect to be provided, like how many calls have you had, and how many were answered, how many were answered within what time, you can track that so you can see exactly what's happening, and then you can work through where your peaks are, where the high volumes are to see if you can do it in a way. Where possible, if it's high volume, low level, we need to be encouraging the use of self-serve, but we absolutely accept that we've got to suit everybody. But where we can do that, we need to encourage that take-up so that people can find information quickly, but we have to have accurate and safe information. the services own that and they know the details. So we've got to get a process of updating that information. So, do you want me to make a presentation?
Yeah, just quickly go to the how and then we'll have to take questions.
Okay. So we've set out quite an ambitious programme, and this is the documents that you have, the strategy and the enhanced business case that goes to Cabinet on 14th of December, which asks for, in effect, £1.7 million to make savings that we've identified in the first year of 1.7 million, but it has an ambitious target of up to £10 million over 4 years. And in effect, we will have an in-house provided programme team that looks across a number of what we've seen as priority areas on the back of some complaints analysis, where customers or service areas have asked for support in terms of updating web forms, web pages, literature, reducing telephone numbers, etc. So over 12 months, we will oversee a programme that almost proves the concept that if we can get the priority projects right, we will offer a range of core capabilities in that first 12 months that we can then scale up to those other 1,200 services that we bring on board. It will include smart communications, it will include robotics, preemptive demand. So rather than wait for customers to tell us, we should be fixing what often we know can grow and drive those customer service improvements. So ultimately, this is a programme about fixing the basics and making sure we've got a standardised approach across the council that's of good quality, so that we can improve the interaction with our customers and improve that reputation approach to the city council. But it is very much about behaviours, it's a way of working, it should be about everything that we do. We talk about the citizens as part of what we do really. And that is really where we need to be in terms of technology and that customer experience.
Happy to take questions.
Okay. I'll take and then everybody.
I think we could go into the detail of what we're going to discuss, or whatever. At the end of the day, what this comes down to is that having the active support of the senior leadership team is not enough.
No.
What we need is active engagement, active promotion, setting it as a priority, asking questions until this starts to improve. Because I'm frankly angry with the quite appalling responses I get. And not for me, it comes to me when they've tried, they've not got anywhere. And, you know, in the last week, I've been blatantly lied to. I'm told that something's been done. When you actually go and ask the people who were supposed to be talked to, oh, no, oh, yeah, we can sort that out, actually, Councillor. But I was told we've asked them and there's nothing that can be done. And I mean, you know, it's a cultural thing. You can set up whatever process you like, but if people don't do what needs to be done to sort out problems citizens in this city face, we won't get anywhere. And that needs leadership all the time.
But not just leadership from the top of the administration as well, we need leadership from everywhere, don't we?
Absolutely, but unless we have active leadership from the top to say this is the most important thing, this is what we've got to do, then the people that care and the good people will try and push the agenda. But you need it driven down so that everybody's pushing it.
And the people that are at the top are very defensive as well. They try and deflect criticism away from their directorate towards central team or anybody else other than themselves. That's the other thing that I found. I've had lots of conversations with senior officers about, and it isn't until you go public that they sit and take notice. It's just internally, and it doesn't, you know, reverberate around wider council. In other words, their peers don't get to hear about it. It doesn't really matter. As soon as, so it's the reputational damage to themselves that they care about, not the impact on members of the public. That's the impression I get. Grinda.
I mean, I'm going to say things along similar lines, to be honest. It's like, firstly, I just want to raise the first part is just a question. When people put in like contact one of the contact centres or put in a complaint, I don't know, for miscollection or something, or something they've reported, do they get acknowledgement back to say that your complaint report has been acknowledged, here's a reference number? That would be really good, because that's a way of tracking that they've actually been acknowledged and they feel like they've been heard. Because if you're sort of like doing things online, it's a case of, okay, well, I've done it, but what's going to happen now? So at least it's got a reference point to say, okay, well, this is what your complaint number is. That would be really.
We ought to call it a crime number, really.
Yeah. But secondly,
This is a crime.
it is. Well, the thing is, it's quite frustrating for residents. I mean, I know the number of times that I've contacted different council departments because residents have tried to contact something or try to sort something out, and they just feel like they're getting nowhere. So then what they do is they come to us as councillors and we kind of resolve it. And like just a few cases that recently, council tax issues, that people have been told they've been taken to court. They've provided evidence and receipts and everything, payments they've made. And basically it's not acknowledged, and they just repetitively send bills without acknowledging the payments that are made. And that individual is then told, okay, well, you're now going to be taken to court which haven't made payments. So they panic and they come to us as councillors. We then, and I panic, I've then sent the same receipts and still nothing happens. It's still a case of, this is the amount that's outstanding, but you've been sent the receipts by me, you've been sent the receipts by the residents. Why aren't you acknowledging it? And if we had some sort of feedback at the end of dealing with an issue, say, okay, actually, what is the score that you give away in terms of the way that inquiry was handled, that case was handled? And if a particular portfolio consistently had low grades, we know that there needs to be further investigation in terms of how that department's operating, and we need to look into it. Say, okay, well, why are you getting a low score? And give people an opportunity to feedback. If we're getting repetitive complaints about similar issues, we know that's so there needs to be a way of tracking where the errors are, so people are held to account. And if people aren't held to account, we will continue.
That's exactly right. I'll go down and check that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, on the same line with Roger, we choose what it does when customers are not satisfied. Puts a great burden on the elected members because that's where they actually turn to. And the acknowledgement part is fantastic. You get an automatic reply saying it's been referred, but when it's resolved, you don't hear anything after. That needs to be sorted. And on your commitment by the council on the long list where you've got timeframes when things are going to be done. Yes, some of them are 8, 9, 10 months, 12 months. But how are we going to track that, and what impact will it have on the actual budget? So it's the responsibility of the people that we need names. Who's actually failing in the chain? I mean, that's what's missing.
We'll have a chat about that at the end, and how members have got to be in control of that process.
Yes,
I think.
Yeah.
Because we're the ones that are ultimately, our jobs are on the line if things aren't right. So
we're answerable to the constituents. Thank you, Chair.
Debbie.
The document itself is really a document for reading. You're pretty transparent, honest about where things need to be, but we're not there at all yet. I mean, it's a short-term document, it's also a long-term document. The question is long-term. I was interested in the forecast, the monetary forecast, and just the one question I've got, you talked about the 4-year savings. The year 23-24 is sort of over 1 million savings. I just wondered why 22-23 it dropped down to 50,000 somewhere. It seems dropped down to 219 savings. I just wondered what that complete fall in savings of 22-23 was. It's then go back up in year 23-24 for 1 million savings. I know that the actual document itself, 12.2, is about potential savings. I think the key word there is potential. So, you know, and I'm not sure, I don't doubt you're not trying to hide that, because you do say potential, it is in the document, and that is to be seen, I assume, long term. So I know you've got figures in there, just a bit sketchy about the drop in the 22-23 year, that you can answer that. The 1.7 million that you will go to cabinet for, very briefly, one sentence or two, is that it? I mean, it may be in the document, and I may have missed it. I assume, and I anticipate further down the line, will require more to balance those. I mean, there's a cultural issue here. Around that, the background of that is the cultural aspect, there is the financial aspect. And I'm trying to tell you the numbers of the course and solve that term, because you need to, I get. I think what would be good for the committee is and on track, sort of with the same how we are with that, because it's such an emotive issue. I hate to say it to you, I sent an email yesterday, a horrendous email. I just have a reply yesterday from May, and I don't know, I echo that for everybody. I think one thing we're doing short term is trying to allocate best way we can to resolve the issues. And I think council members seem to go any route they can. I mean, I wouldn't want now, we're not contracting autumn operatives on the ground rather than that hierarchy. That's the way to get in, and that's the sad way to get in. So from an elected member's point of view, while I'm doing that, I think that whilst the customer themselves are priority, it really is a case of other members have said, we go in any route we can, and we should be at the top of the rank without a doubt. Everybody's important, not just elected members. But some, I won't go into the details of those emails about this week, but they were critical cases and critical measures that had to be taken to get the job done. But should be able to put there rather than really.
Do you want to bring in Deirdre, and then you've had all of us then, Deirdre?
Yes, thank you. Well, I agree with what someone said about it being a cultural thing. And I'm not convinced at all that what you will do is going to make any difference. I think it's rather typical that you just want more money to try and provide what should have been wrong in the first place. And I think it's in some respects it's a people thing. I mean, sort of one example is when I was first a councillor, the road repairs were done by the council. Then they went to Amy, and then they went to Kew. Actually, it's the same people. It's the same people that I email. It's just, you know, you live in the dip chairs, but it's the same thing. And I think, and this is a thing about the public sector as opposed to the private sector. Most people in the public sector have got pretty secure jobs with good pay and good pensions, whether they deliver or not. And that is not the case in the private sector. And the local councillor again said that we are responsible for the electorate. Yeah, but not all of us are either. Because if you represent the safe scheme, you're never going to lose it. To be honest, it's really only the councillors in the marginal groups who are at risk of. You can look like that car. You never expected to lose 80 would ever the council did. And I used to say to you, when we used to have joint members, the lady would be just fine, trying to hang on to my seat here, and you know you're never going to lose. And that's the problem. Too many people aren't accountable.
Deirdre, I hear what you're saying, but the reason it wasn't safe, it was hard work, and I know you were going to stop. Anyway, let's not have a discussion about it.
So that's what I'm saying, too many people are not accountable.
We made it safe, that's what I'm going to say.
Oh, I can say that for episode.
Of course you could. Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem, yes. You and I know who the good councillors are and who.
Let's just change it up.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and I raised this with the year before, well, I'll say one other thing first. Staff are leaving. That's another thing. Numerous staff are leaving. organisation, and that means there's no continuity. It's constantly somebody new and they don't go to the past. Look, that's it. And another problem, this is the one I've raised before, is the working from home. Because it was announced again this week, oh, you should go back to working from home. Half the people in this organisation never came back. And they never came back. They were still working from home when that announcement was made. If you work in Morrison's supermarket or Sainsbury's, you have been working on the front line for 2 years. Why are they expected to do that? And if you work in a cosy little office here, you just 4 people in a big office, or you work from home. Because the best one in the world, if you're working from home, I'm not saying everybody is, but it is easier not perhaps to be so efficient as if you were in an office with other people keeping in mind what you're doing. And none of that helps if your organisation is failing. You need to make sure everyone is doing that way, everyone is seeing people in that way, and in fact going the extra mile. Because otherwise, throwing more money at it is not going to make any difference. And I, as I say, anywhere I can, I agree with that. It's a cultural thing. And that's what's changed, but I don't see that it's going to.
Just from my perspective, I said something in Labour Group on Monday night about a particular directorate. It got back to the boss of that directorate, and they rang me up on Wednesday late in the evening, just before I was on my way to the Lord Mayor's about 6:30. Oh, I understand you've got concerns. Now, they shouldn't have to do that to know that there are concerns. And that's why I'm saying, unless you raise it in a forum where their reputation may be tarnished, they should be as concerned about those statistics, not about whether I speak up in a meeting or any of us speak up in a meeting and their reputation maybe. They should be concerned because this is poor. So I hear what you're saying about the corporate team who signed up to it. I think that a lot of them have signed up to it because they feel that's what they're expected to do, but deep down, they're not really signed up to it. They want it to fail, so they can go back to the old system, but they have ownership and control of their own complaint system. No one knows what the hell's going on. That's my perspective. Okay, over to you two.
Can I just?
Sorry, Naomi.
I just want to add a point to add to my previous comments, really. So I just want to say, so in terms of feedback after a case has been closed, too often we get residents saying, well, they've closed our case, but they've not dealt with it. So we need to get, as you say, it's supposed to be customer-centric. So we need to have a way of, after a case is closed, we get feedback from the customer, because the department might say, well, actually, we've dealt with it. The customer thought, actually, that's not what I raised, so you haven't dealt with my issue. We need to have a customer feedback as part of it as well, at the end of the case.
Okay. So thank you for the feedback. I can understand completely your scepticism because you experience it day in, day out. Your residents experience it day in, day out, and it isn't good enough. Yeah. And let's be honest, it's not good enough. I'm not here to justify that performance. What I am here, though, is to say that we're going to try and fix it. It is absolutely founded on the culture and ways of working in this organisation. I can talk digital till the cows come home, but until we tackle it at every level, and it's not just about the senior leadership team, although they clearly need to be held to account for their own performance, and that includes myself. It needs to be at every level, because everything you're experiencing is actually about really basic customer care, ownership of the issue, and really feeling like they want to solve it. Get the service right in the first place and solve it. So, to be honest with you, at the moment, all I can say to you is we've got a plan to fix it. We've got measures that we need to put in place that are already in place. I was with the Chief Executive yesterday, where she was absolutely picking on all the performance areas that we are doing. And yes, we still need to hold people to account. And that, so for example, through the business planning work that's going on now, much more rigour on performance. Why are you not performing? That's happening. But time will, and your role in scrutiny is going to be vital to sort of shine a light, which you have been doing in the last year and a half on those kind of issues. So this program of work is founded, and it's a shame we're having to do this, but we're having to tackle it head on. It will touch every single member of the council. Employees. So that's at the heart of what it is. And a lot of what you're experiencing in terms of feedback, performance, data, acknowledgements, right hand, left hand, not talking to each other. Those are really common bits of feedback and the discovery work that we did. We wanted to understand in detail, was informed strategy. And that's why we've also designed the strategy in terms of fix the basics. Nobody should have to do that, but we've got to do it. Then we talk about setting the standard and raising the standard, because we know there is no point just fixing the basics. We need to put some aspiration. But it comes down to your core point, which is managers, team leaders, individuals being held to their own performance. And I'm not going to hide away from that. That is going to be our biggest challenge.
So, I mean, part of our role is to make sure that transparency and accountability happen. Yeah. I mean, I've no doubt that you two are, a red button, but I think we need to ensure that the member involved in that. I think we talked about the data coming to this committee on a regular basis, because all the committee chairs are here, and it's on the central point where we can review the performance across the whole piece. Yeah. But I think that all councillors need an opportunity. So I've been speaking to the leader. He, as a result of conversations he had with the opposition group leaders, about the city council needs to be looked at again, just to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is to be the premier debating bit of the council and reflecting the issues that are most in residents' minds and complaints. I think the executive report that goes on a quarterly basis to council ought to contain. I mean, I think we need a customer service report to call council every quarter. That's my view, because that will give us an opportunity. There's no hiding place then. We can all see it, and we can all, I wouldn't say the public, but we all know where the areas of change are needed. So I think that's, I'd like us to, at the end of this item, to have a recommendation that we do that the executive report, or we have a customer service report on a quarterly basis for council, and that we receive from here as well, so that there is no hiding place for the board performance.
Sorry, Councillor Rice, can I let Wendy answer something?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
As well, like the money angle and stuff like that.
I think we need to just make it very clear about the opinion of financials. You're absolutely right. So we're saying 1,200 services, in effect, we need to go through with fine-tooth through. So they'll go through and review the customer journey, customer experience, that whole process. We anticipate this is going to be at least a 4-year programme. What we haven't done is gone through and said we need X amount of premiums pounds for a 4-year programme. It's 1.7 million that we, so the programme started out not as a financial delivery. It was about driving up standards across the council. But as the programmes have developed, and obviously with the financial climate, there was a £10 million savings target against this programme. So as part of the original customer programme and customer strategy work, £4.5 million worth of capital that potentially would be needed to go through those 12 services. At this stage, with what we know from the data from complaints, sort of the dissatisfaction, where we can see that it's performing very bad, we've identified and mapped and worked with service areas to identify £5.9 million worth of efficiencies, identified as a result of digital automation, customer interaction, where you've got 3 or 5 handoff points that we can reduce down, we can make some real efficiencies, but more importantly, customer satisfaction improvements. But of the 5.9 million that we've identified is in the sort of first tranche, if you like, year one, we've only validated with the services who naturally are worried about budgets. 1.7 million pounds of that has been sort of signed and boiled, if you like to say. That is the number that we can deliver. Because that number will come out of service area directorate-based budgets depending on who's going through that change. So the 1.7 million pounds that we've asked for is sort of move existing employees that work in customer services, ICT&D, as dedicated people to now work on this programme of, say, the first 9 service areas, 9 to 10 service areas, where we take them through a whole customer experience, make the changes as we go, drive the improvements over 3, 4, 5 week performance sprints. So understand the issue, create the new model, make the improvements, and then move to the next piece of work. So the efficiencies fall out across that 12 months as we go. So at the end of year one, we expect to come back to say, the 1.7 million pounds, here's the programme of work, here's the improvement, demonstrating evidence. Now, all the technology that we will be using, the automation that we've put in, will be scalable. So we won't be coming back next year to say we need another 1.7 for the technology that we've already invested, we've already done. We're building it in a way that this should become business as usual. So we should be in a constant review, checking ourselves to say, what's the satisfaction? Are our processes fit for purpose? What systems and technology have we got that we can use already instead of just going out and buying something else? And where are the experts? And so we're building a team, if you like, that's already dedicated to be that customer service expertise, so that the only people that we need to buy on, if you like, those sort of very, very technical, specific, if you like, design architectures for system infrastructure and stuff like that will go into the background. So the target is 10 million. The ask is 1.7 to draw down to make 1.7 million efficiencies to our people that goes for itself. It will be long-standing improvement that we can scale up to all of those other 12 services as we get to. But this, we can't get to the end of year one, and there'll be new digital, there'll be new tech, there'll be new requirements. That's why we should never ever just take it for granted that we do it once and that will then be fit for purpose for the next 10 years. We do that as much as possible, but the view is that we are building an in-house core team, so we've got the capability to do everything for all services that we can do around all the time. It should be part of everybody's day job rather than just a one-off program, press the button and then next year. Because in a year, 2 years, 3 years, it falls over again. We've done that. We don't need to worry about it. And absolutely, yes, they do. They need to continue to worry about it. It should be part of it.
Most of the 1.7 investment is people cost, but there is some technology as well. We're only assuming, along with performance rating, categorised tools for that, you come back to cabinet to judge our performance in the first year, and then whether we go further, how far we go, what extra we follow through on that. So that's how it's been designed. I don't think we can answer the 50k. I think it's just a phasing issue in terms of what particular year, what particular capability releases what particular saving. So we can come back to you on how that's been mapped out.
So some of this is almost so basic that it's you will believe it not to be implemented. So
All right.
Some of the efficiencies and
We're sufficiently disillusioned already.
But just as an example of how simple some of this stuff is to fix, so we've got a garden waste service. That every year we've got a process where we sign people up for garden waste service. We ask them, do you want it this year? And we then have to put additional staff in the contact centre to deal with the extra calls that come in at that early bird offer, to take the payments manually over the phone, to sign people up for garden waste service every year. So every year that service is routed based on who signs up, who doesn't. If we did that in a different way, thought about that customer experience, if you sign up for a garden waste service, you would expect to garden waste service, set up a direct debit, and that's it. You don't have to talk to us again. You're just going to collect that garden waste. You sign up by direct debit, and that continues until the customer decides, I don't want it anymore, I'll tell you when to stop. Therefore, we don't need all that additional form in January and February. We don't have to take annual payments over the phone, which costs us more to transact. The direct debit payments are in. The service can route in a way that it knows that that's
We haven't got a direct debit service.
not the garden waste. So one of the first things in this piece of work is about saying, okay, we need to review constantly to stop doing that, and this is how we do it. So that is how, when we talk about fix the basics at a basic level for our customers, that will be a much better experience than having to remember to phone every year to renew that subscription and then take payment. So when I talk about basics, that's just one example, but this is what in that first 12 months, there's some basic activity that we'll be fixing and doing as we go.
No more examples, because I only cry in public with funerals, and I you know. So good, should we wish them good luck? Roger, and then you.
Yeah, okay, first I support your suggestion about the council. I mean, what I particularly like is if you actually focus down on a particular service area, maybe. So, I mean, at the moment, we've got a crisis in housing customer service that a lot of resources are being thrown at. Have we ever discussed that in full council? No. So, you know, we really need to do that. The second point I wanted to make was, and I will admit, because I was dealing with loads of casework, I haven't read through every line of this report, but the improvement graphs, which the improvement, do you agree, both the council needs to change and improve from 91.5%? So yes. Have we got comparisons with other councils who have presumably asked similar questions, got similar scores? Because I think in a way that is one of the most acid, shows this into strongest relief. It's not just because you can look at that and say, oh, well, yeah, there's these problems. It's been the pandemic, exactly. But if, you know, city council, when asked the same question, the results are radically different, you can't get away. Yeah. And finally, I do think if you talk to residents, or sort of active residents, the chair of David Ford, what he would say is a lot of this, he believes, the root cause of a chunk of this anyway, is the sort of failure of the localisation agenda. What he would say is, well, I used to be able to come to a committee of the council, a ward committee, the constituency committee, it was formalised, there were notes taken, and I could say my piece about what I wasn't happy with, and it was listened to seriously, and you know, see what happened with the next meeting. Now all we have is a forum, no formal minutes. Come along and we have like a discussion. That's it, and it's not good enough. And I do think that sort of that process of the destruction of the local formal committees of the council has allowed people to retreat into the centre and distance themselves from what citizens are experiencing, are unhappy. And that is part of the jigsaw puzzle that was right.
Yes, and help within with that because we also have a district office. And I could walk into the office at Harlem West, very close to my home, and speak to all the officers all sitting on, you know, half an hour each time with everybody. It's so much better. But anyway, I just wanted to say something about, you said that business of not having a direct debit of the green waste. And so you said we need to review the policy. Sorry, why? That sort of sums up the whole thing. Why do we need to review the policy? You come up with a clear government. Why isn't that solved by this afternoon? If we take direct debits for some of the things, it won't be that difficult to put on the green waste that so that before you ever open it up, that's done. That's done. There's too much with the council. We've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to do some work on this.
I don't think that was a very good
you know what I mean?
imitation of how senior officers do. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I share your frustration. We share your frustration. We are going to get on and do it. you're laughing. There's a leap of faith, which I appreciate you probably don't want to make, but absolutely shine a light on it.
Okay. Just on the localisation, Penny Holbrook, may she rest in peace, her committee was looking at localisation, and it was due to report in January next year. It might well be delayed. But interestingly, the chief exec came up to me during the break at full council, and I go back a long way with the chief exec, because she used to be the economic development officer who came to lead the ward committees back in the 80s and 90s. So she's like the views that have been expressed, wants to try within the present financial constraints to look at how we can somehow breathe life back into the organisations. I think we all agree the city, the size of it is important. So let's see what the local services and housing, whatever it's called, committee reports in January, because that will come to full council and that give us an opportunity to look at the recommendation. Are we happy to recommend to the leader that we have a quarterly customer service report at full council? Are people happy to sign up for that? Yeah? Good.
Yes, really from the negative from council, there's no time to delay anything.
Well, that's why, should we ask for, the leader has said that Bobby and John are still, have concerns about full council meetings. We don't have enough time to discuss these key issues. And if you were looking in from as a member of the board, you think, well, what they're discussing is not what is important to me. So we may be asked to do another quick and dirty review between now and the end of the municipal year, but more on that. So I think that's our opportunity. But in the meantime, I think on this issue, it sends a signal that we see this as so important that it needs to go to full council every quarter, and with with a minimum of 1 hour to discuss. I think let's try and put that in the recommendation. Okay. And you're gonna say what's in store for us now. We have hoped that the chief exec would come today, but she couldn't make it. So do you want to tell us what we've got in a future meeting?
I think based on sort of today's discussion, the idea is that the meeting in February and March is meeting by service area. The wrap-up reviews of the chief executive comes to me in February, along with Scrutiny. So they'll sort of that, and then in March, we'll bring in the director of housing and inclusive growth. So again, we'll be able to sort of look at those areas in a bit more detail.
Okay, so we're going to get a chief exec and we're going to get heads of service to quiz them over their attitude towards complaints and what they're doing about it. Okay, so it's a focus that's going to remain with us on an ongoing basis. Okay, so thank you all very much. And once again, Peter, Wendy, you've never let us down in terms of your commitment. Your task, should you care to accept it, is to make sure that it permeates throughout the city council. Thank you. You got stuck in traffic, I understand.
Yes, my apologies. Thanks for accommodating me, but I was doing an assembly this morning at Eden Girls' School in Small Heath.
As you do.
Yes, and we've got a bit waylaid, be some questions and answers at the end. I was getting stuck with some questions from year 7. And then
you have no problem with us.
This is trying to get a walk in the park in comparison, and I got stuck on the way back in traffic, so my apologies.
Okay, so Robert Connolly, you all know him and love him. We asked him to come along. He gave us a presentation on the new rules probably a year ago now, Rob. And you did talk about a pilot, didn't you?
I did.
So he's going to update us on the changes to the elections bill as a result of the elections bill. But it also, which is critical for us as well, there's the parliamentary constituency boundary review, which will be very interesting So over to you, Rob.
Yes, thank you. I'm not going to go through the whole report verbatim. I think you'd be pleased to know because I'm taking that you read it. What I might just do for everyone's benefit is simply highlight as I've done one of the sections what the main changes are, and then I'll be led by the committee how you want to then discuss each of those items. I think just as a preamble as well, I did mention before I sort of chaired a working group to help with government. That's now evolved into an expert panel, which feeds directly into cabinet efforts or the lack of legal, what it was called now. And I've also given evidence to a parliamentary committee back in September. What I did find useful when doing that was the feedback I had from the previous November from this committee. And I think what is lacking very much nationally is sort of local members having that ability to feed into the bill and some of the implications.
That is dominated by MP.
Yes, very much so. And I think Birmingham, probably one of the few authorities, have actually taken the steps to brief local members because there's still lots of unanswered questions, and that might come out in some of the questions I get today. And I can simply back back say, I don't know. And I can say that honestly. So I think if we just sort of talk about the bill, it's still aimed to come into force from May 2023. It's actually gone through its second stage in Parliament now. And just to sort of come by way of background, whilst the bill will become law, I say in May, there will be secondary legislation which will come in during the autumn of next year, which will have all the nitty-gritty details, which I think we'll want to know. So if I then just go to the report, I'll just quickly go through some of the headline issues and then we can pick them up one by one, if that's how you want to do it. Again, when I spoke last time, we talked about the biggest change that I think most electors will notice is that if they go to a polling station, they will now need to produce photographic ID. We can talk about what that will look like. If someone hasn't got photographic ID, then it will be my responsibility as the electoral registration officer and ultimately the council to provide it to any elector free of charge. There is also going to be new requirements around postal vote. So whereas in the past you've literally been able to register for a postal vote for life, and you now just refresh your signature every 5 years, you now have to reapply for a postal vote every 3 years. Again, I can go into the details when we look at it in a bit more detail. Also, it will limit the number of people who you can act as a proxy for, now limited to 2 people, and potentially 2 people plus 2 overseas electors. Also, when we're talking about parliamentary elections only, that it will extend the right for overseas electors. So currently you have to show a link to a constituency and you have to reapply every year. That's going to be abolished. So you can just say, I was in Birmingham, so we have to find out, see what checks we can do, get a bit of lack of detail, and therefore they can just re-register every 3 years. It'll make it a lot easier for them. I do have a list of that to identify constituency. They're going to say they're Birmingham, but it's going to be, we've got to try and then go back. Because you used to be limited for 15 years, so they could go back 20 years. And the trouble for us is, where do we find the records? And maybe in the case that we have to go to the library and go back looking at registers from the 1990s or something. And also where you have, say, someone, a child before they left this country, they can then have that linkage as well, but there won't be any records. So it's still a lot of detail that I think we need to have ironed out. It's also going to change sort of the right of EU citizens to vote in local elections. We'll cover that again in a bit more detail. I think that'd be worthy of a bit of a conversation. It will also, and this is very apt, I think, at the moment, simplify, clarify the offence of undue influence to protect campaigners and politicians. Unfortunately, I don't know what this looks like. We've asked for details, but it's been dealt with by a slightly different department within government. Again, so as soon as I do know more detail about that, that's something I will be bringing back to other parts of the council, anyway, like Member Development Group, in terms of safeguarding members when they're doing your constituency or your ward work. Then there is going to be the introduction of a new offence for electronic or digital imprints. So anything you put online and a little document, you're going to have to replicate what you do for a leaflet. So it's produced by or promoted by candidate and who by it. So that's going to have to now be replicated online.
On social media, that's the end of social media.
It is, because I think currently you don't have to do it. There's a real sort of gap in the legislation, but we still rely on legislation that predates social media and probably predates the internet. So there's kind of in a very rushed way some of the headlines. And I think, as I say, we just have to go through each one now. Again, I'll be led by yourselves how you want to do it and what sort of questions you want to ask.
People got something straight away.
Oh, not really, but it's just a small point. And Appendix A is the list of constituencies. Edgbaston seems to be missing.
If that's the case, there is no sort of hidden agenda. They're going to abolish Edgbaston constituency.
I live in Edgbaston, but I don't want to move.
It begins with, it's not there, it begins with Birmingham.
I'm going to have to hold my hand up and confess it's missing, but
You've never liked Edgbaston,
my sincere apologies on that. I will fix that.
Yeah, well, before we go into details, just on the last boundary changes for the local elections, there's still an issue with where people can go and cast their votes. I've still got constituents who actually live 50 yards away from the polling station, but their polling station is about a mile away.
We're in control of that, aren't we?
Yeah, well, yeah.
So I think that's a separate conversation. Like that with Robert. So that, but let's focus on the bill at the moment.
And I'm happy to pick that up.
Every year you send us a list and you look at where they're going to be and if you've got any comments. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, we do mostly after every election. We tend to do a review.
Yeah.
You know, where we have problems, so then suggestions.
Yeah.
You have to do a full one every 5 years. You tend to do it after every election. So we start then with sort of the voter ID. I think we'll probably say that's going to be the most visible change to most electors. In 2.3, I make a very clear distinction here that you wouldn't require your ID for voting at UK Parliament elections, local elections in England, and police and crime commission elections in England and Wales. The reason I make that distinction is that in Scotland and Wales, it won't apply to their local elections. It will only apply to national elections because their dissolved assemblies have their own sort of rules. Hence the reason that the election in Scotland and Wales, they will have a situation whereby in some elections you need ID, and you could well be 16-year-olds voting as well, but they can't then vote in a parliamentary election, and they're going to have to produce ID. So that's going to be, I think, quite difficult for them to manage. One of the benefits, at least in England, is that it's going to be the same rules for every election, and I think that will be easier for us once it becomes business as usual. Having for different elections, I just think it's fraught with difficulties, very much so. Again, we still working on the sort of what documents will be acceptable. It's still likely to be what I said out in my report last year, but the main items will be like your driving license, passports. And I was asked the question, what about out-of-date passports? And as long as you can still identify that person from the picture, that should be acceptable. But we all know that passport photographs, even current ones, don't always reflect what we think we all look like. Again, one of the issues I've raised, and this way it comes into a conversation about potential pilots, was for Birmingham. If we are looking at introducing this in 2023, our first scheduled election will be the parliamentary election in 2024, which is when it's scheduled, which will be combined with the mayoral elections and PCC elections. running sort of parliamentary elections are probably the most difficult because of the sheer demand and numbers and increasing the voters. And I do worry how we will get that message across in terms of telling electors you need to turn up with
That's
ID.
my concern, that people still turn up, with card, regardless of that, and that may, well, it'll be, there's the interaction with the staff, there may be anger and whatever. Secondly, they're gonna have to go away, and come back with an ID. Yes, I mean, it's down to us political parties when we do our leafleting, I guess, isn't it? We're gonna, I mean, sometimes you put, your nearest polling station is. I think we're all gonna have to, the first few elections, we're all gonna have to, remind people under new rules, you need to take photographic evidence.
Surely there's going to be TV.
Yeah.
There is an aim to do that.
Yeah. And because I know people happily read all our elections.
Obviously, it's going to be more time consuming. People may have to go back home and come back. And every election, the biggest rush hour is after work. So it's in the evening. So I think a lot of people are going to be denied. The closing time is still 10 o'clock. And people say, oh, hang on, I can't get ID. No, in situations like that, there's going to be a lot of issues.
Have you ever thought of having staff that, which are the key, you must have data on where, have you ever thought of having extra staff on first thing in the morning or, before work and after work? I just wonder whether that's something that, rather than having the same staff and the same number throughout the day, whether you could anticipate these sorts of issues and.
You see how we've done it ultimately, because when you fully understand what you're coming from, what we actually our staffing ratios are different between polling stations, depending on the electorate. So some polling stations, for example, will have one poll clerk, it's fairly small, some will have two poll clerks, and some will have three poll clerks, plus a presiding officer. So that gives the presiding officer some flexibility, how they can manage flow in and out of the polling station. That said, I think we do have to revisit what that will look like, because potentially now we're going to have someone else looking at ID before they even get to the table and start causing queues to say, well, that's acceptable, that isn't acceptable, or to sort of accept it before the next stage. But also, I think what we've got to be concerned about is I've got to ensure my staff are now properly trained in terms of how they deal with.
They're not your staff, are they? Because most of them are doing other jobs.
They're my staff for the day.
Yes.
That's how I draw the distinction. And it's a quite a big burden, I think, we're going to be placing on them. And they're going to have that point say, no, you can't vote. That looks nothing like it. Because whatever we do, we have to
use 6'4" rugby players to do the.
Recently on every polling station, like we used to have.
I mean, just to potentially add to the problem, with the proposed changes on postal votes, you could have a chunk of people who thought they had a postal vote and then realised they don't have to vote on the day. And that could be quite a large number of people. So, assuming they do still actually go and vote, you get an extra burden in the polling stations. So, obviously to mitigate that, quite an effort to get people who fall off unless they re-register seems to be sensible. I agree about extra staff in the sort of 5 p.m. to 9 p.m.
I think it's something you ought to look at.
The other question I had, which was just from looking at the elector numbers, when the new register came out at the beginning of this month, so a quick look through comparing the two registers last year's and this year's, I thought it was quite a drop off in numbers consistent across the case. And I know we've had conversations about particular individuals who decide not to register deliberately, and ultimately we don't do anything like that. We remind them, but this bit that they get that says, you can be legally prosecuted for not registering. We don't actually go down, we choose not to go down that route. I understand why. But my concern is that more and more, is it more and more people deciding for whatever reason not to be on the register? I don't think it's the population you've got. That doesn't, the demographics don't seem to say that the population of 18 plus is falling. Or is it perhaps more innocently just the fact that it was boosted a couple of years ago by the general election? Some of that's tailed off, but it does concern me.
I mean, that's something that perhaps we need to have a more detailed conversation about, because I haven't had the opportunity to start looking, comparing those registers. And there are teams within the city council who've done some sort of work on the population, what it looks like within each ward. So I'm happy to have a look at those, and then I'll perhaps bring those up with my sort of regular meetings with political parties to identify is there a trend. I think you're right. There is often a very peak or surge in demand to get registered for parliamentary elections. And registration, no matter what we do, is always event-led. So it's no good when there's no election trying to get people to register because they're not interested. It's only when we get an election, usually a parliamentary, that they thought, oh yeah, I need to check if I am registered. And that's reflecting like that. You get turned out of parliamentary election, which is double, slightly more than you do as a local election. I mean, I'll give just a couple of other points just to pick up from the comments there. Councillor mentioned about TV campaigns. I think that's absolutely right. That is the plan. Well, I think what we have to be very wary of is just not in 2023. I think they have to do it for maybe 2 or 3 cycles, well, at least 2 parliamentary cycles until it becomes business as usual. And again, I say that looking at what happened in Northern Ireland, now they don't give it a second thought because it's just business.
How long has it been in operation in Northern Ireland? Several years, isn't it?
They used to have some sort of identification, I think, from 1998. Then it was either in 2003 or 2005, it went to photographic ID. But after their reasons for doing so were very, very different.
98%.
Yes. And on the staffing issues, one of the major difficulties we have in meeting staffing ratios at the moment is getting people to work for us. We have high dropout rates, but it's a long day, 15, 16 hours. We're governed by what we can pay by government. And ultimately, by the time you've gone through that day, it comes on to stop work and you pay tax on that money as well. And I think it's what worries me, because we've got to be asking staff to do more in terms of responsibilities. They become less and less attractive. And I think recruitment, again, people willing to do it, will be.
We've got less staff within the local authority that traditionally.
We kind of moved away from that deliberately. We did it a few years ago, so it's less than probably at best 50-50. Only because we used to have difficulties in getting council departments to release staff for the day. And again, and when it's not just purely council staff, I say gives us a bit more flexibility. We're not kind of reliant on everyone agreeing to release their staff to us.
And if you had banking staff who finish their day's work at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and don't go and boost the numbers in the. We look at options like that. I don't know that.
Absolutely. I don't think nothing's off the table in terms of how we're going to try and resource it. But it is, again, I think that is one of the issues we're going to have to manage, particularly going to a parliamentary election. That's where you get your large queues more than.
Well, I mean, the classic one for me when I represented Lady was you anticipated the city centre holiday that was when initially representing the board, I mean, The church in the jewellery court, what's it called?
St. Paul's.
St. Paul's, yeah. That sort of thing. And there's always been a very low turnout. But the general election, there was a massive turnout. And I remember the queues, 100 odd people before 10 o'clock, and they couldn't vote because you used your projections from the local rather than the general. And there's been a massive build in the jewellery.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is difficult to get it right all the time. But
Yes, I remember that incident very well. My first parliamentary election
was it? Yes. Okay, should we move on to
the next part. Just going to quickly talk about local ID cards.
okay.
Because again, this is another kind of worry that I have. The whole bill, of course, there'll be some worries if I'm honest. Where's
It's like a psychoanalyst, for his words, isn't it? Where
you're meant to be reassuring.
it's qualified,
I am.
Are you?
I'm an NLP practitioner.
Okay.
So if you want a session on.
I'll get best friends rates. Again, as far as the like, right, if you haven't got ID, we have to produce it free of charge. Current estimates, based on research from government, is that 2% of the electorate won't have an ID card and then have to come to us for one. For Birmingham's electorate, that's something like 15,000 electors. Obviously, how accurate that is, because something like 2% is an average, they reckon. So something like Birmingham, it could well be a lot higher. And how do you do that just for cut-off day? Because they are talking about having cut-off day or applying for a vote card the night before voting day. I don't know how we, when we're doing everything else, could do that. It might be to have conversations with Peter and Wendy, and that they'll have to do that. But then we have asked the government to look at some digital. What we can do digitally? Can people apply online for an ID?
Well, that's it. I mean, if you can, we passport online now, don't you? And I suppose the passport's the single most important document you ever have, I think, in terms of your identity, isn't it? So you do that online. But then if you haven't got a bank, if you haven't got, you probably haven't got internet, have you? I don't know.
Well, that's the other issue.
I don't know.
So there still have to be a paper process somewhere because you still got that digital divide, and we can't assume everyone has access to the same level of access to the internet.
Yeah.
Because we have all the knowledge. And again, it's the other kind of issue that follows up from voter ID is that we do reviews for all our polling stations every year, now pick one every time. But we're going to have to add another criteria to it, is where we get people, say, for example, for religious reasons who don't want to show their face, how do we then check their passport and their photo or ID card against that individual? So we may have to make sure that every polling station has that facility, be it putting screens, where we use huts, for example, how can I accommodate that? So again, it's just another consideration that we need to take into account. And then we then need to ensure that every polling station is staffed by female. And so again, I have to admit, we've never done any work about what that actually looks like now.
Yeah.
Something we are starting to
I think you can safely assume it would be, and especially, I think across the all polling stations, you're going to have male applicants.
And also, if you look at my benefit card, they have an area which is sectioned off with basically there are certain parts of the verification. So maybe we look at something like that, we have a section off. So someone, you got a female there and they don't want to sort of uncover their face, but they will say that space, it's only them that's in relation to their that might be a way around it to the female.
It is, and it's really then making sure, because I know some of our polling stations will not have that space to do that. And people think because we're Birmingham, that in every polling district, you've got somewhere suitable to hold the polling station.
when we haven't. You know, there's a real dearth of suitable venues, but people don't understand that. And there's conversations of how do many councillors about venues and trying to find somewhere adequate within the Parliament district. So that's all probably I'm going to say on ID cards at the moment, unless there's anything else you want to sort of. And so I've touched on the next area, then I was going to talk about was around postal voting. I've kind of touched on what those changes are. So I say postal voters will have to reapply every 3 years. If you don't, you'll then go by default, I suspect, back to being a voter in person. And it comes then back to Councillor Harmer's point that those people who don't sort of reapply and they haven't thought about it, they haven't got an ID card, then turn up at the polling station, how are we going to accommodate that? The answer is also to negate postal vote harvesting, which is a term used by the government. Political campaigners will be barred from handling postal vote or completed postal votes. I think that is right, although I think it will get some honest instances or examples whereby, for example, I've had a candidate ring up saying, Joe lost on the script, you can't get out, can I just collect these postal votes and give it to you? And we got, yeah, you've reported to me, you've got an audit trail, I'll say I've agreed it. So it will hit instances like that.
So can you, when it first started, the boom in postal voting, I like taking a completed postal vote off someone and I used to save you money by putting it in the internal post. I think I only did about 18 that first year. Several hundred. Anyway, and I likened it in my mind to giving someone a lift to the polling station. You know, it's the same sort of thing. They can't get to the polling station. I was giving them a physical lift. They couldn't get, and or didn't want or whatever. So I took their so it's a similar principle, isn't it? You're assisting people who otherwise would find it difficult to vote.
I do also think it's a legacy from all cases we had in 2004.
I certainly. Well, as a Labour Party, we do not allow our members to canvass people who have got postal votes. I know that other political parties don't do that, but if it's got the PV next to it on our voter identification sheets, we are not allowed to cancel as an additional step. We tried to get your parties to
knock the door and say,
no, but we know, yeah.
If you after the votes have been delivered.
Oh, okay. So
After the postal votes have been delivered.
Yeah,
we're not.
sorry, I was going to say,
No.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So, as an added safeguard. So, you know, I think we wanted to be absolutely clear that what happened when, you know, that we've learned lessons as well.
Just one more thing, Robin. When applying for postal votes, what verification ID how will that work? I know going to the polling station, yes, but if you reapply after 3 years when it expires, you actually reapply for a postal vote. So how is that verification going to work?
Can I come back to that with this later on? Because there's something else I want to just flag up that I think is going to be slipped into the bill.
Oh, yeah.
But if you please remind me, I may well forget.
I think it's reasonable to have a cut-off for permanent postal votes myself. I think it's reasonable.
it's going to have an impact.
It will have an impact
Do you mean if someone's at the profile for several years, able to apply again?
after 3 years. Unless, again, you only used to be able to get a postal vote for medical reasons or if you're away. I just wonder whether there ought to be, if you have a profound disability or you're seriously ill, whether that
You can apply for a permanent one.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the main, it's.
Yeah, I think if you could beat that back, I think it would be,
Just one other sort of point on the postal vote. question is that you can get a number of postal votes being handed into a polling station on polling day. The new rules will mean that you can only now hand in 2 postal votes for domestic electors and maybe 2 postal votes for overseas electors. So again, I worry that is a little bit low, because if you've got a house that's say 5, you can only hand in 2 postal votes.
I mean, I remember certain parts of Labour would whole families went to vote together, you know, 8, 9, 10, you know.
How do you release that across different polling stations?
That's a very good question, because it's a question I've asked that as well. Because
I think. Yes, go on.
Because the question you've asked about what's stopping from going into one post station with 2 votes and the phone next door with another 2 votes and so on. And I think the devil will be in the detail on that. But I say I don't think you can pocket police polling stations.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the time. Christian's got to do a survey of potential city council venues immediately after this meeting. I know you've got a. Yeah, so I'm not saying, you know, can we?
I mean, I think to me that's around postal vote properties again. They're probably key for members. I think they affect you directly. The rest, I think, in the report, I think it's hopefully fairly self-explanatory.
Non-contentious.
I wouldn't go that far, say like self-explanatory. The only thing I would sort of ask for kind of a quick look at the ban.
Yes.
Is
the key thing for me is that it includes non-Birmingham wards in Birmingham, which I think is an important principle. I don't know if anybody else.
I mean, I suppose the issue for we under the elections bill is that I think a number of EU citizens will be losing their right to vote from 2023 onwards. It doesn't impact on 2022 elections, and I think
What's the logic behind that?
We haven't got time to do before 2022. The logic of
Stopping them being able to vote.
because we've now left the EU. So unless there's reciprocal agreements, then
There's only small numbers to begin with, because the ones that got the right to stay.
they do.
Oh, yeah. So those that have applied for settled status.
So very quickly, there may be an opportunity to apply for a postal vote online, which I think has been welcomed, but I do have reservations personally. Again, and also because of the volume we could get, like for example in Leeds, we might postal votes. They went up in May from 80,000 to 90,000, nearly over 200,000, and I would worry about that.
Because it's easier to get.
Yeah, and because with COVID, and I also worry. Again, I use the word worry, and maybe that's the wrong word. But if we go to like a virtual ID system, will that then push more people to go down the postal vote route because they haven't got ID? But that's when we go to postal vote. That's when we have no control once they leave.
Is that mandatory? It's not optional, the online application?
No, that'd be optional. But as far as I know, they were just talking about it. I don't know how far they got to slipping that
So
in.
you could have an online application now if you want to.
No, you have to submit a paper form.
Some leagues did it then.
No, they just promote,
Oh.
they promoted that you apply for a postal vote.
Okay, all right. Really, you want to?
What we also recognise is that with COVID and everyone having to sort of like get more IT literate, and having to work from home, a lot of people are doing that, and obviously police and thousands of cars. People are getting more active in online or in person. So when Walter standing saying concerned, you also need to acknowledge the changing times about how people are now beginning to do things differently. Because I would never have set up a meeting online before all this happened. But now, so people are now getting more IT literate. They're kind of forced into this situation. So I think as part of the whole equation, we have to look at that as well. And also in terms of advertising all these changes, I know it's already been raised about having publicity on TV, etc. but also use community channels as well.
Yeah, you're going to have to do all of that. That's why I need the input of members to do that. So just a quick sort of headlines, if I can mention, and I'll hand over. Police and Crime Commissioner and now they're changing the voting system from, supplemental voting system where we used to have to go to 2 stages to straightforward first past the post. From an administrator's point of view, I'm rather pleased by that, but again, that's a very selfish perspective. They're abolishing the fixed term Parliament Act, so now the government can.
They can always override.
Yes, but now they can just do it straight away. Just means we get the sort of notice, and then that's pretty much what I'm talking about the bill. And then it's just a question of the boundary region. Again, what I've set out what the current proposals are. I've set out the timetable within that.
So just in terms of the feedback from the consultancy, is it local authorities and political parties or anybody can comment on the proposal?
Everyone and anyone. And if you haven't, then I would encourage everyone to do so. I do, from an administrative point of view, I think it is better than what we've got at the moment, even though we do inherit 2 wards from Surrey Hull, because they're now sort of more coterminous with our own wards. So I think I said before, we did have.
North Edgbaston, I've got 4 wards, old wards and 2 constituencies. And North Edgbaston is going entirely, the recommendation is entirely into Edgbaston. Everyone's really good. No, it's just crazy having 2 MPs.
And again, I think my sort of concluding comment there is there are a number of risks to the bill in terms of when it all comes in. It's the cumulative effect. Each one on their own is you can manage. Or putting them all in at the same time will then cause, I think, potential burden.
I mean, the thing that the most MPs don't understand is the sheer size of Birmingham. So much bigger than every other local authority that the burden of change is happening straight as a result.
Yeah, we're by the biggest in everything when it comes to electorate, constituencies, ward sizes. So I'm.
Has anybody got any questions or comments?
Just the one I raised about, applying for a postal vote. How are they going to do the voter ID or the ask for a passport or driving license? How are they going to manage that?
I don't think that will change, because at the moment, when you get on the register, you have to, the first time, you have to provide your national insurance number, your date of birth, and then we go off and check that detail to make sure that you are a real person. So there are sort of checks, and then we check against DWP records, and if we can't match that new elector, then we then have to ask for other forms of ID. We ask them to write to give us a copy of their passport. In terms of postal votes, it's a simple forward application, whereby it comes in, we check that you are on the register. There's an assumption that you are a legitimate person. So I think with the introduction of individual registration, and now you have to prove who you are, it's taken away the risk of having too many, the expression was ghost voters that have been made up and stuck onto the register, because you have to verify who you are. And everyone who was on our register at some point has had to provide that information.
The key thing is the signature, which is scanning them to make sure the signature on the postal vote matches the one on the application board.
And date of birth as well.
Yeah.
So you've got to know an awful lot about a lot of people if you're going to do sort of what I call wide scale postal vote award. I think it's much better than it was, much safer than it was a number of years ago. But I say what we can't control is what happens in households.
Sure.
When people cast
I mean, integrity in the electoral system is a hallmark of good democracy. Absolutely fine. Okay. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you, Rob. Always very interesting to have you here. And as I say, there's nothing that is our interest of more than talking about elections, what we're all around. Okay, let's just run through the rest of the agenda quickly. Work programs are all there for information.
I was just going to say that the budget, you might be alongside that.
I'm just coming along to down that relief. Yeah. Date and time, next meeting is Friday, the 21st of January. Will it be here?
We are currently doing some work to look at to look at options for so at the moment,
Just more repairs.
How do people feel about hybrid meetings? Because one or two members won't come because of they're worried about their health. How do people feel? Do you think it's something that we want to consider? We shouldn't just consider it committee by committee. We need to have a policy across the council level. But I think it's something
is clear. Obviously, you know, next week there will be no change in the vision for making decisions. So, if members.
So, can I speak up, Daniel?
Sorry, there's been no change to the arrangement for making forward decisions. So, as a result, we still need to be able to forward and to vote matters. What I agree to watch the work and the sites and venues. Currently working with the option of venues and going to something around to really research.
But I think it's important that there's consistency across things.
Are you just looking to hire venues, community venues? Is that what you want? Or council venues?
Council.
There's limited options, but we're looking at what we should do given the situation.
It might be Villa Park, all those Blues fans here. It might be Villa Park.
Well, even at Alexander Stadium, we used to have our district meeting in a room.
Yeah.
And it was quite a big room, but it was always nice and warm in there.
Well, I mean, I won't speak now, I will set out, but we have got things over on.
You choose the board events, and I won't attend.
Big better equipment there now. We've also got fellow to the West Midlands fire service. So we just looked at options. This is remains an option. We want to make it slightly better for wherever we're in.
Well, you say that, I'm sure the load will run. The work will overrun.
Sorry, just on.
Is it on schedule?
Well, I don't know, but just picking up, because I had a meeting yesterday with the Commonwealth Games team, because they got, I think, first call on the council now. So, and one of the things that came up yesterday is making sure that our needs don't clash with their needs in terms of availability of some committee rooms, for example. So that's another piece of work which means we have to do. And just out of
I have confidence in the office and sorting this.
Well, at the very least, that is going to be September, by September. We would like to have some of those be over.
Yeah.
yes, I'm really hoping so.
Yeah. And by the time you take out the election, because you know, we all have a chance.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I just like that my last council meeting saying, I know. Still are. Oh, yes, thank you. Request for call-ins, none, other urgent business, none, authority to act, three, thank you. Thank you all very much. Have a great Christmas and healthy and prosperous 2022, and let's hope that we can get back to normal as soon as possible and have some parties. Parties. I know.